Hey everyone, welcome to the Age Group Triathlon podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode, I'm looking at triathlon injuries. Now, this is something that I've been wanting to talk about for some time, but I don't feel confident enough in my own knowledge of the subject to be able to stand up and wax lyrical on the record about triathlon injuries and what causes them and how to prevent them. Because it is a really complex subject. I've got a lot of knowledge about the human body, but I can't confidently be able to tell people, this is what causes injuries, this is how to recover from them. Because this is the job of a physiotherapist, also known as a physical therapist over in the States. And so for this episode, I brought on George Stacey-Stevens, who is the director of the Cirencester Physiotherapy Centre. And I've teamed up with him, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be having a look at broadly sort of what causes triathlon injuries, as well as how to recover from them, what the rehab process looks like. So this is a very long conversation. It took us 2 hours. So I'll split it up into two 1-hour episodes, because a lot of people, they'd be more than happy to listen to a couple of 1-hour episodes, but a 2-hour episode, and people are going to think, you know what, I'm not listening to that, I don't have time. So we're going to jump in and we're going to start looking at how you can reduce your risk of injury. Now, a caveat here is that, training for triathlon, if you do it for long enough and you're training hard enough to push your limits, you're probably going to get injured at some point, even if it's just something small that goes away within a few weeks or a couple of months. There is no way for us to completely help you avoid injuries completely. What we can do is we can help reduce the risk and take sensible steps. So this is what the podcast is about, is to help you be able to plan your training, to help you be able to sort of work out how it is that you can avoid injury in your training. Now, I try to keep this podcast pretty beginner friendly where possible. However, we do really go into some detail here. Some of the language that we use is much more from the world of sort of musculoskeletal injuries and the whole sort of exercise science. I try to bring things back a little bit when I realise that some of the language is getting advanced. But at the end, I'm going to do a summary for you. So even if you get a bit lost along the way with this episode, I'm going to do a short summary in plain English at the end, in case some of you find the language a little bit overwhelming. Anyway, without any further ado, let's get stuck into the chat. Hello, George. Good morning, and welcome to the Age Group Triathlon podcast. How are you doing today?
Hi, so yeah, Grant, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me on. It's a pleasure.
Oh, you're
Hi,
very welcome.
everyone.
I've been meaning to get a physio on to have a chat about these things because, I'd say
Mhm.
that, I've got a reasonable understanding of injury in the human body from all the education that I've done, the strength and conditioning qualifications, my own experience as
Yeah.
an athlete getting injured and the like. But it's one of those matters that I'm reluctant to talk about in detail on the record. Because
Mm.
if I get things wrong, if I give out some bad advice, that's the kind of thing that can have, it can have a really like knock-on effect to like, lots of other athletes who will follow this
It's a big,
this podcast.
indeed, it's a big part of training.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
it's
It
definitely
is.
it's outside my area of expertise. It was like
Mm.
repeated in my qualifications time and time again. If somebody is suffering with pain when they are exercising, you need to refer them out to a physio rather than try to handle that yourself.
Mm. Definitely. And it is. It's an interesting process because, as you say, it's the expertise and there's the pain aspect of things, but the individuality and how much, as you say, it can kind of certainly injuries and pain can affect consistency in training application, then subsequent injuries into returning to training.
Yep.
It's an interesting part of that kind of, let's say, certainly with the both from new athletes as well as top athletes, how it can affect their training plans massively. So it's a very intricate and individual area. So it is, as I say, the strength and conditioning qualification that you have will be is probably I always as an element. I always joke with people that say physio is just glorified PT with a bit more knowledge in the injury side of things, but it's that kind of process of
Yeah.
individuality. And as soon as you've got that, then 90% of it is done with the training plans. But
Yep.
as I say, on those odd occasions that something that just is a bit weird and wonderful crops up,
Mm.
And yeah, as I say, it's the physio side of things is nice just to get shed a bit of more specific light onto an injury type.
And it's just getting that diagnosis in the first place.
Mm.
Because
Yeah,
somebody can come to me and they can say, "Oh, I've got this pain running at the back of my heel." And I
yeah,
can say with, like a large amount of confidence, "Oh, that's an issue with your Achilles tendon."
yeah,
Chances are that your calf is tight and that by doing some calf stretching as well as loading up that calf and developing the strength there that we can overcome that. But it could be
yeah,
that the calf pulling on the Achilles tendon actually originates from a tightness or dysfunction in the hip, and
yeah,
that's just being sent down the kinetic chain, so that the muscles down the back of somebody's leg until they get to that Achilles tendon. We can probably do a lot of calf stretching all the calf stretching in the world, but we're
yeah.
not actually treating the issue there. And
Or
to have a proper screening with a physio, you can, test these things, look at how someone moves and be able to go, okay, we've got pain here, but chances are I think this is originating from here, is that's, something I couldn't begin to couldn't begin to look at
yeah,
myself.
and there's niche pathologies inside that. For you can go into kind of posterior heel pain, retrocalcaneal bursitis. It is these kind of weird and wonderful little things that kind of present very similarly to certain things
Hmm.
that would actually respond very differently to
Yeah.
strength versus stretching versus plyos, for example. And it's that kind of some kind of sub question of not only what it is, but what stage that athlete is in. Because again, the elite athlete is going to have a very different looking rehab plan to that of the individual that's just starting in a triathlon journey in terms of kind of level of plyometrics between those two
Yeah.
people, for example, hugely different in terms of that kind of initial training exposure, which is
Mm.
best, as you say, just specifying. And that's kind of the biggest thing I always think with physio is this idea of the pathology can be relatively easy to diagnose. It's the
Mm.
question of where you are on that pathology and where your level of conditioning is. And I'll do a
Mm.
little bit kind of a lot of what I'll be saying today is this kind of idea of what is the difference between level of conditioning and level of training load, and that kind of balance between those two factors. And
Mm.
especially for proper endurance, kind of hyper endurance training that we do in triathlon, is that kind of balance is such a crucial part of pretty much everything that both from a performance and rehabilitation perspective that I would kind of go into. It's kind of that's the biggest thing I'd like to go through today as well.
Yeah, excellent. And just for those who are listening who haven't come across that before, when we talk about plyos, that's short for plyometrics, which are exercises which are done that are things like jumps, leaps, medicine ball slams, those kind of more explosive exercises that we do, because, that sort of lifting weights is all well and good, but as triathletes, we are taking that strength and we're developing that into force as well as simply being able to repeat, sort of that static motion, which it does actually crop up more than you might think in somebody's rehab plan if we're looking to get them back into a performance sport environment.
Yeah, that's huge. Massive, massive part, certainly for those latter ends of rehabilitation and for performance as well, which is nice.
So, before we get stuck into things too much, if you can just give us a bit of information about yourself,
Yeah,
so
of
sort of to
course.
set the listeners up so they can get an idea of who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, of course. So my name's George. I'm the director and physiotherapist at Cirencester Physiotherapy Centre in Cirencester. We're based in the leisure centre. I have a very keen interest in both sporting and kind of conditioning based injuries and exposure through both kind of personal exposure in my own sporting endeavours as well as through clinic time. I'm lucky enough to have a kind of a very broad sporting environment that's kind of boiled down to kind of triathlon in the last few years and through my university period. So probably picked up well, I was probably 18, 19, trained as a physiotherapist in Worcester University. In that time, I was a rowing was my main sport. I did a hell of a lot of rowing. Got up to GB start levels for lightweights, which is relatively good. I was kind of a top 10% in that environment. Was very intense and kind of had my own fair share of injuries, mix of overconfidence from thinking I was good enough as a trainee physio, and the kind of belligerent, kind of old fashioned nature of the rowing world. It was kind of
Mm.
do more, and then if you're a bit injured, kind of do a bit more somewhere else, which these days probably is not necessarily, looking back, the most logical thing to do. So I've had my own fair share of kind of
Mm.
interesting injuries from that, which then essentially, but during those slight injury periods, I picked up triathlon work within university as well. So mainly through Olympic distances, which was good fun, and then got to the point of doing a few kind of for the university and things like that. Kind of built a keen under, especially through the cycling world, quite a keen understanding, because it bridged quite nicely with the rowing training for the long zone 2 sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Much easier to do the long distance kind of application within those heart rate zones. From there, I spent 2 years working for another clinic, also in Cirencester, until COVID. COVID kind of came along, and unfortunately that clinic shut down just because of stress and pressure with the economic environment, which actually allowed me after that to start my own clinic in Cirencester. Kind of essentially off the back of that, thankfully I already had a bit of a name for myself in Cirencester, so it was relatively easy to, the reputation allowed me to build my practice
Yeah.
up a little bit more, which was nice. Built into that, had again 4 years of probably hard graft. Probably not. I probably sacrificed a little bit of my own fitness in that period,
Oh
which
yeah.
was maybe not the best thing in the world. But from there, I went into my brother. It was actually my brother's idea. He came back from Australia of all things and challenged me to go. Well, you used to be a triathlete. Fancy doing an Ironman? Which, because I couldn't have him being stronger and fitter than I am,
Mm.
I couldn't say no technically. So went from there, and then last August competed at Ironman Trun in Switzerland. Managed to do, finish with a 10 hour 43 at Ironman time, which was really quite good. I was
Over a
the
course like that,
98th
especially.
quickest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good fun. It was very good fun. Gorgeous environment. But it was one of those kind of idyllic, very, very idyllic courses,
Mm.
and really got stuck into kind of developing and understanding the kind of balance between training plans for those ultra endurance, the importance of consistency, kind of finding that balance of when you are injured, how do you cross train, what you work around. So it was a really interesting exposure after in that side of
Mm.
things, which was quite nice. Then the last year, just off the back of those environments, trying to help my recovery build back into more of the Olympic length distances and sprint distances. Me and my brother managed to talk my dad into doing a few sprint triathlons after we'd finished. So we're
Nice.
kind of getting him started in kind of the different worlds, and getting him kind of, it's the first triathlons he's ever done, so it was kind of a very, very different end of the spectrum, which was good fun. But that's kind of me as a broad
Mm.
kind of spectrum of sports. But I've gone from ski, every sport under the sun: rugby, skiing, football. It's just a jack of all trades, master of none, essentially.
That's a classic triathlete, isn't it?
Yeah, there's the game. As I say, it's pretty me. Triathlon was the kind of logical step. How do you be a good at three different sports that are actually the sports you need to be doing? Well, just go and do the sport that's actually multi-purpose, which works
Yeah.
quite nicely. But no, it was very good fun. It was one of those environments you go, it's incredible. Just something that certainly the atmosphere, the time spent, and even just the training journey was
Mm.
so much fun. Being able to, especially with my brother, who I'm very, very close with, being able to sit on Swift and do things and have that really close connection. And the way that the sport brought me closer to my family is a huge part of that journey as well.
Mm. Yeah, excellent. No, it's nice to hear that, multi-layer, the multi-layered approach. It's not just a finish line, it's not just a finisher's medal. It's everything. Obviously that can represent obviously the journey, but yeah, it's all the training, it's the environment that you're in and that kind of that journey that you go on as an individual as well.
Absolutely.
I think that's kind of the most impactful part of endurance sport, really, personally. But for those who are new to the world of triathlon sport, can you just explain what a physiotherapist does, what
Of
your
course.
training looked like, and when it is that an athlete might want to visit you as a physio?
Absolutely. So, as physiotherapists, as I joked earlier, that we're glorified PTs, which is a bit of an oversimplification. The best way of describing physios, we are, from a training perspective, individuals that would look at previous patterns of injury and or current volumes of training exposure in for this environment. And what we're trying to do is find and use from pattern recognitions, things you're saying, and having kind of interviews and what we call a subjective assessment
Mm,
to look at where we think what's this kind of be injury, lack of movement, previous pathology, feeling of tightness, all those different things that could constitute the world of physio and try and boil it down to be that an injury, for example, if you've come in for a specific pathology, what type of injury it is, and then from there, utilize the current research and understanding to really build a catered and specific strength and conditioning plan alongside hands-on therapy
mhm,
to both minimize and heal the pathology that you've had brewing in that area,
mhm.
and then utilizing strength to prevent that in the future, alongside the act of screening for certain movements, especially for I always say prevention is a lot easier than cure, is the act of
It's a
if
lot
you're getting
cheaper
to
as
the point
well.
where yeah, it is just a hell of a lot cheaper. It is if you get to the point where you understand, and this is a big part of what I do in clinic, and I will talk a lot to people about the understanding behind training and the
Mm,
knowledge behind it. And the more you both know in terms of right, what are we looking for in training plans? What movements should your shoulders, especially for swimming and triathlon,
mm,
but these kind of feelings of certain hip mobilities, what are kind of say movement quotients, if you like, to get to the point where we can minimize the chance of injuries. And what areas are like, for example, when we look at running, the most common injuries are in hip tendons and Achilles tendons because they are areas of real specific focal load for that
mm,
type of sport. So the more we can go into it and go, we know this, we've got copious of volumes of research to show that those are areas of high risk injuries. You go, well, if you're going into this as both a new triathlete and or a very well conditioned triathlete that's trying to up their volume, well, if we can prevent injury, I'm telling you now, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to train more consistently. Get to the point you're enjoying that training a hell of a lot more because you're not having to battle injuries consistently.
yeah.
And it's that idea of trying to minimize the, let's call it resistance within an enjoy. As you said, this kind of element of triathlon is so much more than just the finish line. It is the enjoyable nature of that entire process, friends, family, the community, people, even just Swift racing, which I think is great fun. But the community you can build in those environments
Yeah.
is that if you're constantly plagued with injuries and having to battle and kind of constantly stop and kind of stop start that trend, it takes a lot away from that environment.
Mm.
So if we can get to the point where preventatively, that's principally what I do as a fit physio is get you to the point where you can enjoy the things that you do, is especially from a triathlon environment.
So I think that obviously, if somebody were to pick up an injury, pick up a tendinopathy, which
Yeah,
is sort of where a tendon is generally sort of stretched, it's placed under too much load and it starts to become slightly damaged. It was my
yeah,
understanding of it at least, and that is when people will start to get nagging pains around sort of various tendons in their body. Is
absolutely.
that it can stop you for well, I know you said you don't like to stop athletes from running
Yeah,
together.
this we'll go through that in a bit.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely,
but
it's an
it
interesting one.
can when you are if you're training for a marathon, you're training for an Ironman, and you're out and you're used to putting in 2 hour long runs, and then
Absolutely.
suddenly you have to slam the brakes on and go, actually, we're going back to like 20-minute, 30-minute runs with walk breaks.
Yeah,
It impacts your physical development, but I think the
hugely.
impact on somebody's mental health
Yeah,
is
just aggression.
arguably just as, if not more impactful, because they've gone from being on
Absolutely.
this upward trajectory, feeling fitter, feeling stronger, going longer, going
Yeah,
faster, to suddenly being
absolutely.
absolutely sidelined. And I think a lot of us as triathletes, runners, endurance athletes, we're guilty of making the sport our personality.
Yeah,
We sit
absolutely.
there, we get to work, we're thinking about our next training session. We're trying to about, oh,
absolutely.
can I fit in another session in the evening? I'm going to go back and going to watch another YouTube video. I'm going to listen to another
Yeah,
podcast. I'm going to start
completely.
researching bike upgrades. And when you suddenly have an injury that comes along, it
Yeah,
completely,
size lines, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely huge there.
I mean, even if it doesn't stop you from being able to train completely,
Mm,
um, you are being, you have that limiter of that
yeah,
injury that's holding you back. And it raises the
completely.
questions about, are you going to be able to make it to your event? What's going to happen there? So it's not you don't want to just, it's not the kind of thing you want to just like wait and hope that it doesn't happen to you. I really want athletes to take a proactive steps to avoid this from
Yeah.
happening in the first place.
Yeah, and it is, and that's the thing is that certainly from my own, even in my own Ironman kind of journey as a physio, I had certain things that prevented, and it feels the demotivation in those elements, that
Mm,
ability to sit there and go, right, I have to completely revise my plan in how I want to train and how is effective to train, and that's a big part of the training program aspect and working with coaches. If you are,
yeah.
for example, I'm fortunate. I fell off me when I was training at a training ride where I fell off my bike hitting a pothole and dislocated my collarbone, which is suddenly you go, well, I've got to swim tomorrow. I go, bollocks,
Yeah.
can't do
Yeah.
that. And that kind of element of completely not even injury based that you can kind of
Mm,
prevent. It's just a sod's law thing.
yeah.
That, as you say, from a motivational perspective, of that you've got this kind of perfect glorified run in your head where you're getting
Yeah.
fitter and fitter and fitter every week, and suddenly that the brakes get slammed on. And it is, I say, certainly from a motivational perspective, when you,
Mm,
especially if you've got no one around you, say, thankfully I have my brother and people that I could
mm,
work with and family that support those environments, sort of thing. But especially if you're in a world where, quite as you say, quite a lot of time triathlon can be a little bit of a lonely place when you're out in the mornings and going or out on your own because of the practicality of the environment. If you've got
yeah.
no one to support you in those environments, that can be a very hard thing to remotivate yourself from.
Yeah. And with the episode I did last week, I chatted to one of my athletes, and we were chatting at the end, and he was saying how powerful it was having somebody like me to work with. Because as
Mm.
much as your family and friends can be all there supporting you, wishing you the best, like making sacrifices themselves to help ensure that you can
Yeah,
achieve your dream, they don't actually understand what it's like. You can't
yeah,
having that conversation with somebody who can then like can really understand and relate to and guide from their own experience rather than just the general kind of cheerleading, aspect that comes
yeah,
with
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Like that environment that you find
absolutely.
yourself in is massive.
Yeah, and that's the thing, to have the empathy from a practical perspective of having someone next to you that's gone through those exact things that you've gone through
Mm.
and being able to empathize with those. And as I say, it's the benefit when I've worked with triathletes myself in clinic, it's that ability to sit there and go, yeah, no, I know what you're feeling there. I'm
Yeah,
looking kind of, yeah, okay, 4 hours on a bike on Zwift in the middle of the winter. It's not the nicest thing in the world, but as you
yeah,
say, how do we work around those things
yeah.
to enjoy them?
And I think that's for me at least, both from like a coaching perspective as well as, looking more specifically at physiotherapy, which actually, just to get the glossary out, I believe is referred to as a physical therapist in the US, if you're
Yeah,
listening
yeah,
from over there. So it's because over here,
PT.
a PT refers to a personal trainer, which is somebody who's qualified
Yeah,
in gym instruction. But over
yeah,
in the States, a PT is a physical therapist who you go and see about injuries. So just in case you're getting a
yeah,
bit confused by the language that we're using here, if you're stateside. Um, but you've got physios and you've got physios because you have those
yeah,
who they work with more, and I'm definitely not looking down on these people at all, but people who have more experience and more knowledge working with the general population, people who are
yeah,
recovering post-surgery, people who are working for the NHS
yeah,
perhaps, where it is a little bit of a sort of a turnstile where you'll have a sort of a 30-minute appointment, and 15 minutes of that will be a questionnaire, and you'll be given, something that's a relatively sort of basic, perhaps in some cases.
yeah.
There are good physios, there are
Bit
bad
generic.
physios. Yeah. As opposed to if you find yourself a physiotherapist who is an athlete themselves. is
Yeah,
an
and that's
athlete, and they've been through that, and they understand the psychology of an endurance athlete, and actually what it
yeah,
takes for somebody who's already really quite strong to be able to recover from an injury, rather than just giving them some relatively pedestrian resistance band
yeah,
or body weight exercises. There's
absolutely.
actually quite a big difference there, isn't there?
It's huge, yeah, and it's an interesting thing, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Is that, and we talk about this idea of the differences between, let's say, an athlete base, or people call them sports physios, versus a generic kind of NHS physio or something of the like. Is that, and this is the interesting. Theoretically, there should be no difference between us. That's the theoretics of it, as it were. We all have access to the exact same research. We have the access to the same volume of support in the network, like the exact same training, the exact same degree. But because we are human, and this kind of way is where, as you say, having your own personal biases, and essentially as an athlete myself, realistically, I'm going to be selfish to an extent. I am going to, when I'm through my own injuries, through my own experience, through my own career, because I have bias towards looking at injuries for endurance events, high levels
Mm,
exposure, because I'd say I'm not impervious to injury just because I'm a physio. I do silly things as well. It's that idea of going, when you're looking at those things and digging into, same as what triathletes do with bike aerodynamics. You go,
mm,
when it's that thing that's in your way, the ability to focus in and build knowledge in those environments, and having that kind of self-investment in that
mm.
world is probably what develops this idea of this kind of stereotype of a sports physio. Those individuals that have been through those things themselves and gone, right,
Yep.
okay, I've got the knowledge and the access to then dig into these really specific
Hmm.
research papers around tendinopathy rehabilitation. It's a lady called Jill Cook is the
Hmm.
current individual that does a lot of rehabilitation in Achilles tendinopathies, for
Hmm.
example. And you can just start to reel off and kind of really dig into those depths of research. And it's
Yep.
that ability to principally curb your own biases and look into these objective pieces of research that develops the understanding
Yep.
around a sports physio, for example, versus your generic physio. Because again, as you said about the idea of certain types of exercises, that if you get a sheet of paper and that individual's never really understood what it's like to be an endurance athlete, they have no idea the level of force and the adaptation, the volume of ability to have not even just, okay, here's your rehab. It's that question of, well, how do I fit my rehab around my current sporting
Mm.
environment, my home
Yep.
environment, my current training plan? Just simple things like that, not even the prescription of the type of exercise itself, which I think we're going to go through later on.
Mm.
Is that it's just the ability to understand, right, how can I make this as efficient as possible for that one person,
Yep.
which again, as we said earlier, is why it's a lot easier to do it preventatively rather than waiting to an injury to occur. But it's that process of going, I say that core difference is one level of knowledge because of the application development into that area because of our own, be it our own injuries or our own interests,
Mm.
as well as the level of time we can spend, especially, and that's probably the biggest difference compared to the NHS, is that
Mm.
probably seeing in the NHS appointment once every, probably initial appointment will take about 4 to 5 months is the current waiting
Hmm.
list.
Yeah.
And you're probably seeing them once a month. With athletes at the moment, if once a month, I would expect complete kind of an injury to go from completely unrunnable to principally full running training program within that month.
Yeah.
That is a huge change in activity levels. If I was only changing and altering exercises 1 month at a time, that would be useless, essentially, from my understanding. You need this kind of close hand understanding of, because athletes are much fitter, they adapt much quicker than the general populace. So
Yeah.
you have to keep up with that rate of adaptation to those tendons and injuries,
Yeah.
which is a big part of what we do within the private environment compared to that of the NHS. It just allows us to accelerate the rehab so much quicker.
And I think that it's a lot of triathletes have a predisposition. They'll go, oh yes, I've spent sort of 5 grand on my bike with the bike and the
Yeah.
upgrades and got all these tires
Yeah.
and gonna get myself this top of the end wetsuit that's like £700 because that'll like
Yeah.
take 10 seconds per hundred of my time,
Yeah.
obviously, because the marketing tells me that.
Absolutely.
But then when there's this, oh, okay, well, you've got yourself an injury. Let's get if you want initial consultation, then it will be £75, £100, depends on where you are in the country for that initial
Yeah.
appointment. And people, oh, I'm not paying
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
they'll either go, oh, I'll figure it out myself, I'll Google it, or they will go, okay, well, I'll hop on this sort of this 4 month NHS waiting list. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, their race preparation is completely going up in smoke. Because
Yes,
they're
exactly.
either going to be like unable to train because of the injury is like stopping them, or they're going to be
Yeah.
training on an injury, making things worse.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
nobody enjoys paying for physio. It's
Yeah. It's fair
um,
enough.
it's one of those that it's but if you actually want to protect, it's like coaching. It's not
Yeah.
sexy to get a coach, but what it will do is it'll help ensure that you get to race, your
Yeah.
race day fit, injury free, and that you can go out and absolutely smash it that day out. And I work with athletes, I can take 3 or 4 hours off of their Ironman time. You can't
Comfortably.
buy upgrades that will allow you to do that. But it's a similar mindset with physio, which is if
Yeah.
you've already invested so much time, so much money into the equipment, into the
Mm.
event, then
Indeed.
you need to bite the bullet and you need to find yourself a physio that's actually going to understand you as an athlete and be able to give you the right exercises. Because even, I mean, it's even in private practice, you have different specialities,
Yeah.
like because
Absolutely.
you could well you could see a physio and they could have a look at you go, oh yes, your glutes are weak here, which is it's a bit of a sort of a classic sort of
Sort of easy
diagnosis. Is
thing to say. Yeah.
your glutes aren't working? Well, they are working, because otherwise you'd be lying down on the floor. But
Sure. Yeah.
clearly,
Absolutely.
like weakness in the glutes is an issue here. But whereas one
Yeah.
physio might give somebody glute bridges to do in an evening, one physio
Yeah.
might say, well, we need to
Yeah.
get down the gym, we need to
Yeah.
start doing deadlifts.
You need to. Yeah. Absolutely. And this is the benefit of being where I'm in the leisure centre. But I've got I think the council redid it recently. It's a 300 grand gym. And
Mm,
I can get to the point where any of my patients essentially can use that gym for free when they're with me.
nice.
And that ability, I could not do my job without that gym. It is a absolutely crucial part of this environment. It is, as you say, you look at, and I don't want to go too much into depth, so we can do a different idea interview on the idea of kind of specific tendon utilization and loading strategies. But
Yep.
principally, to create adaptation, you need to be working at 70% of that muscle's maximum to create adaptation.
Hmm.
Anything that's under that 70th percentile principally doesn't do anything other than maintain. So in that rehab where we are looking to create adaptation, one of the crucial things that people get wrong, and again, it's the same as you look at training plans. It's quite an interesting number. The 70% is that quite often zone two training sits around the 70th percentile in
Yeah.
terms of heart rate. And it's this kind of really similar number that runs throughout. And you go, well, why would training and rehab really be any different? We're just
Mm.
specifying different things. And that's the idea, is that, as you say, it's so many people that will go into it. Like swimming and shoulder rotation is a classic one that I often say. If you said to most physios even, oh, I can't quite get the catch in my swimming stroke,
Mm.
I don't think most people would even understand what you mean. It's that ability to understand the medial rotation position, the muscles necessary to hit the position. And as you say, if it is about performance, and this kind of, as I said, we're about saying about the movement screening element of things, you talk about how much speed you can gain, understanding how to get your arms to the point where they're conditioned enough and
Yeah.
controlled enough to actually hit a catch position through an
Yeah.
entirety of an Ironman. And you want to compare that to the gains you can make compared to a water wetsuit.
Oh,
Well, I
it's
can tell you now, a proper catch is going to be 30 seconds, 100, let alone
well,
like the 5 to 4 that you're going to get from a wetsuit. And it's that idea of, as you say, specification that makes a big difference.
it is enormous. Having the mobility aspect is something that I think is really overlooked by a lot of athletes. If you stand at the if you're spectating an Ironman or a 70.3 or any event like that, even a
Yeah,
marathon, and you look at the stride length that some people have, and you look
it's
at the way
insane.
that their bodies are, that they're being limited by their range of
Winding.
motion in their bodies. then they
Absolutely.
are absolutely shooting themselves in the foot by focusing simply on
Mhm.
miles rather than how it is their
Yeah,
body actually moves.
absolutely.
So
It is fascinating.
yeah, it is. It is slightly kind of frustrating as a coach because some triathlon coaches can be very old school, and they
Yeah,
either say they don't believe in strength training, and that
yeah,
this athlete has managed to do achieve this without strength training, so it's a waste of time. It just makes your legs tired. Or you've also got those who will completely outsource strength training, who just put their hands up and go,
Mhm.
and I guess rightly, rather than try and blag their way through it and go, look, I don't really like know or understand what's going on. But
Yeah,
if you look at if somebody were to get an injury, they're going to go to a physio, and the physio is going to go, okay, well, here are some strength exercises to help you overcome this
absolutely.
injury. And these are the exercises that if you'd have been started doing these 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago, you wouldn't be in the
Yeah.
position you are right now.
Absolutely. And you'd be faster.
Yes.
This is the thing, it's this kind of crossover. And again, I won't deep into the research too much, but those old-fashioned kind of coaches that go, I don't really do plyos or strength training, I just do more zone two.
Yeah.
There's plenty of running research that shows that you can drop a zone two session and switch it for a plyo one and gain more benefit than the individual doing it. And there is loads and loads of research. And I'm a big believer in the act of research doesn't really give a damn what you believe. The science is the science. If you get to the point where your belief overruns science and your biases get to the point where
Yeah.
it doesn't allow you to keep up with, and this is the same with physios as well. There's plenty of old fashioned physios out there that will just go, well, no, this is what I believe, and that yada yada yada. That ability to sit there and go, this, to keep up with the research and be able to really
Mm.
promote that to your athletes is what keeps people in front of injuries. And as you
Yeah.
say, the same conditioning exercises that I would have shown someone for an injury prevention are probably going to be the exact same ones that I'm going to give them for if they came to me and said, oh, I want to get faster because of X, Y, and Z. You go, well, it's the same ones. So you go, so it's literally if you do it beforehand, you save all the time from the injury as
Yeah.
well as get faster. So it's that really nice double whammy.
And it becomes all the more important the sort of for athletes who come into sport later in life, or
Yeah,
those who are just athletes who are sort of moving into the masters categories. So on the one
yeah,
hand, you have if you take an 18-year-old and not an 18, but yeah, an 18-year-old who's been on they've been swimming, cycling, running, playing team
yeah,
sports, whatever it is,
absolutely.
since they could walk. You
Yeah,
could then put them onto a high volume training plan, and there
yeah,
is a decent chance that they wouldn't get injured because their
yeah,
body it moves so well. It's got great mobility.
absolutely.
Unless there are any sort of major issues that have come from dodgy tackles or something like that, they could absorb that training without massively getting injured. But then you have somebody who spent 25 years, 30 years sat behind a desk who is
Yeah,
browsing the internet one day and goes, I want to do an Ironman.
absolutely.
And they start reading training advice and they hear
Yeah,
people like us talk about strength training. And they, of course, they have a bit of they're looking for some confirmation bias. So they try and do a bit of research themselves and they find plenty of
yeah,
people saying, yeah, but you don't need to worry about doing strength training if you're doing triathlon. It's a waste of time. But
yeah,
if they have spent that long sitting down, their hips are going to be locked up, their glutes are going to be very weak, they're going to
yeah,
have all of these issues that need to, if you want to go from sitting,
yeah,
being relatively inactive to suddenly
yeah,
start training for, sort of 10, 12, 15, 20 hours a
yeah,
week, you
absolutely.
are going to get injured. I you know,
Yeah,
I mean, I
yeah,
can say
without,
like a good 99% certainty. If you don't
yeah.
include strength training, if you don't include mobility, stretching, something is going to go ping.
And really, as you say about the idea of training programs, that's ultimately, as you say, and this is an interesting thing because we're going to come on to the idea of what injuries do I see most in practice, and what you're saying there is kind of a perfect group into this idea of I say the 18-year-old. I use the word, and you'll hear me use the idea of the word conditioning a lot.
Mm,
So principally, that is a kind of unanimous word for exactly what you're describing there. An individual that is already training explosively, running already, doing team sports, you go, they have got a lot of exposure. Those tendons, the muscles, the things that are
mm,
doing, the mobility, the joint exposure, this kind of conditioning work encompasses joint tendon exposure. It's principally defining the idea that, well, are we the new load that we're going to throw at you, this new type of training, is your body prepared to do it? Have you done things in the past that are similar enough to the things that we're going to show you and do work with you today to make sure that you are prepared to do it? The analogy I use for most patients is like revising for a test. If
mm.
you're if you're getting to the point where you're doing a new qualification, you revise for it, and you're doing it all the time, you go into the test and it's really easy because
Yeah,
you're really used to it and you know exactly all the answers, and it's
yeah,
really, you go, yeah, I could just cruise through that. If you put me into an accountancy exam, I'd sit there and go, what the effing hell do you think? What the hell is this? And that's a kind of a good way
yeah,
of thinking about the
yeah,
going from this
yeah.
literally the inverse of the desk job to anything else. Everyone has their own skills, and triathlon is no different to anything else.
Mm,
It's that idea of going, or if you don't have this idea of continuity and conditioning, which is again, as you say, from strength training, but alongside that, in terms, especially for those new athletes coming through
yeah,
that have never really done, as you say, the individual that are going from a desk job, going up into wanting to be you say 70.3s, full Ironmans, etc., sort of thing. That volume of load, and it's, for example, it's a good little statistic that I often throw at patients, is that for a running stride, so to run normally, we look at there's plenty of research to look at the idea of how much load each stride takes on your Achilles when you're running, and it averages out about 7.7 times body weight,
mm,
which is huge. And it's that idea of going, the Achilles is fully adaptable to that point. But if you've been sitting behind a desk for a long period, it's very hard to suddenly do 7.7 times your body weight. And
yes,
it's the idea of slow consistency, exposure through weight. And again, this is the big reason why that this counter to a lot of individuals that say, oh, you don't need strength training, is that it is very, very, very hard to adapt yourself to 7.7 times body weight without progressive utilization of weight, because it's much more objectively controllable. And that's principally, if we went to look at this idea of individuals that went, oh, you can just do it through training and you can just do it through volume, you go, well, the difficulty of that is that the benefit of strength training is that it is hugely objective, massively, massively objective. We've got so much control of the exact
mm,
depth, range, utilization, level of force, and it's very progressive, it's very controllable, there's lots of feedback in it. The trickiness of just doing it through training is there's so many variables. You go, right, if I said, oh, I'll go and do this 8 minute mile 5K, I don't know.
yeah,
You go, realistically, you've got wind direction, hills, volume of vote, how
mhm,
much sleep you've had the night before. There's so many extra variables in that environment that can cause difficulty in objective standardization. How are you going to create adaptation linearly if you have no ability to standardize the things you're doing? That's
mm,
the really big difficulty. I think it's why strength, as you say, and the fact that you can include strength training in your routines and within your training plans, and you've got all the qualifications you
mm,
have, is so crucial for triathlon training. Is that, as I say, it is so valuable because it gets to the point where it has not, instead of just having a rest session, for example, you can have a practical developmental thing that's going to make you both faster and less likely to get injured
yeah.
automatically in your training. It is invaluable.
And people talk about, oh, just do hill reps instead. Well, that's going
Yeah,
to get you stronger quads, but it's not going
yeah,
to do, all it's going to be developing are muscles which are used in that, for the activity of cycling.
yeah,
And you have
yeah,
the
exactly.
sort of your the muscles which actually, so my instinct is to jump into sort of fitness training lingo, but I'm trying to keep it relatively simple. So you've
Yeah,
got the muscles which are the primary movement. So if you're looking at the pedal
yeah,
stroke, you've got the
yeah,
quads. So on the front of your thighs, they're what are pushing the muscle down. You've then got your hamstrings, which are providing the opposite motion because your muscles work in pairs. But you've also got muscles such as the glute medius, which are there, which are
yeah.
supporting that
Glute stabilizer.
movement. And if you don't
Yeah.
develop that glute medius, and the only real way to develop that glute medius when you're training for triathlon, we're just moving backwards and forwards. The only way to really develop that
Indeed.
is to be doing what we call lateral movements. So you're moving side to side in the gym, whether you're holding
Yeah.
dumbbells, whether you've got resistance band around your knees, whatever that is. But you're not,
Yeah.
you cannot get all the benefits of a strength routine simply from doing lots
No.
of hard sessions.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing, as you say, and interesting when we look at, let's say, use the idea of hill climbing. You go, right, okay, yeah, so that will create, you could almost, realistically, that's more of a kind of hard intensity session.
Mm,
But I wouldn't be in any way be calling that strength training,
yeah.
because strength training is very much the idea of anything. There's a simple way of putting it, because it's probably a bit of an oversimplification. But realistically, if a intensity or session or movement lasts for more than about 15 seconds, then you can start governing it as not strength training. It's the act of the big core element of strength training, and actually how it adapts the tendons is
Mm,
completely different to that of, so to roughly cover it, strength training has a very uniform development of tendon volume. Whereas when we look at jumping, hopping, plyos, it has a concentric, very specific adaptation. So when we're looking at preventing the whole of the tendon from getting injured, doing plyos doesn't actually just strengthen the whole tendon. It strengthens a very unified, almost if you think about an archery target,
yeah.
this is often what I describe it. It has a very unified portion of development, makes that one bit really strong,
Mm,
but actually the rest of the tendon doesn't create very much development. Whereas a strength training has this kind of, if you took it as a cross-sectional area, the whole thing develops unanimously. So it
mm,
prevents the whole tendon from getting injured rather than just little things. So
yep.
it's little things like that in the active. And as I say, same as the glute medius, glute minimus, one of in this glute min are one of the most commonly injured muscles and tendons in triathlon and running
Yep.
that I see by a long, long way,
Yep.
because of the load it uses. And as I say, unless you're doing some kind of lateral strengthening, you can't create this adaptation to those tendons, because it's all, while we're running, it's very linear. And yes, they'll be working from a stability standpoint, but that doesn't develop the tendon in the same way as what strength training does. And it's this kind of process that there is these defined differences as how those two work. No different to that of when we look at, and I'm sure you could run through with your athletes, if you compared zone 2 training to VO2 max training,
Yeah.
they are just they adapt completely different systems, which is exactly the same as what we can argue with the strength training.
Yeah. And the final reason, the group that really can't afford to neglect strength training is that as we all get older, we start to suffer from a condition known as sarcopenia, which I think
Mm-hmm.
starts to
Yeah.
kick in from around about 25, I think is when we hit peak muscle mass.
Yeah.
And after
Yeah,
that,
exactly.
you start to lose muscle mass every year. And I
Yeah.
believe that there
About
are
1% on average
1%, is that per annum?
per annum.
Yeah. And this is something that if you don't do any strength training, then this is going to you are going to lose muscle mass, you're going to lose power, you're going to lose force over the years. Now, and I do believe, I can't remember them off the top of my head. I think there are 2 points at this process at which they really accelerate. I think one of them is early 70s, and another one I think might be somewhere in the 50s.
Yeah.
Do you have the numbers on that?
Is yeah, so essentially the when we look at it, so sarcopenia is, and it's interesting, there's a really defined difference between trained individuals and non-trained individuals, which is
Okay.
quite interesting. So the rough numbers are, we, as I say, roughly 25 to 30 is our peak muscle mass. We drop off naturally between 30 and 35. Then from about 35 onwards, it takes a split in two directions, depending on if you're a trained strength training, fitness-based athlete, or someone that doesn't train at all. If you don't train at all from 35, it's the 1% that we're talking about. Every
Yeah.
year on year, you lose both bone density and muscle mass at around about 1% per year. That is linear from around about 35 to 70, so 1% on year. And then from about 75 onwards, it accelerates exponentially. So you're getting 1 point, let's say, is round about a squared kind of logarithmic curve, if you like. If people,
Mm,
obviously, if you look at it, but kind of looped curve that accelerates quicker and quicker as you age.
Yep.
That's for the individuals that don't train. In
Yep.
individuals that do train, interestingly, and this is very much strength training again. General training will also slow this down, but strength
Mm.
training key is that from 35, yes, you will lose little bit, but actually you don't lose anything from then to 75. You will this kind of 1% number doesn't happen at all. If you strength train, sarcopenia doesn't start happening until 75.
Wow.
From that point, if you're a strong 75-year-old, that only happens at around about 0.2%. So if you're a strong 75-year-old, you are better off than a non-exercising 35-year-old.
I mean, it's hard to argue with that, isn't it?
Yeah,
I had no
which
idea
is
the
exactly.
numbers were like that, but
Yeah, it's extreme. It is so
Mm.
extreme. It's like one of my. I'm actually quite lucky. If any of you are like strength training, my old physio is actually a really good example of this. His name's Graham Stroud. He is currently 66, and holds the world record in the oldest man to ever lift what are called the Derry Stones, which is a Highland Games element. As I say, he's 67. Derry Stones lift is 366 kilos for two rocks, and he is the strongest he has ever been in his entire life at 67. He was a professional rugby player, all those sorts of things. He is stronger now than he has ever been. And this is a very big part of what I talk about in my physio is that
Mm.
the human body is so adaptable. And yes, we have these statistics of, oh, certain things kind of do stop, but all those statistics, all these doom and gloom statistics essentially come in people that don't exercise.
Yeah.
As soon as you exercise, as soon as you do things, as soon as you do, and just a little bit, it doesn't have to be loads, it doesn't have to be
Mm.
this world beating Olympic training program. The first set of 10 reps, for example, in strength training, does about 70% of the benefit of the whole strength training plan. Just starting the first bit, that
Mm.
especially has to be done at the right intensity, all those sorts of things. So
Yeah.
we'll gloss over, has to be the right type of strength training, let's say.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's the element of, the biggest thing is that if you're just doing something just a little, it doesn't have to be huge. If it's done in the right way,
Mm.
it can be not only pivotal for just, say, triathlon or training and exposure, but the rest of your life. It will
Mm.
completely change your quality of life in the long term.
Yeah. Yeah. So if somebody is sort of swing back sort of the injury management itself, if somebody has
Yeah.
picked up, now this is something that I talk about with athletes. I talk about a rule of three, which is if you go out on a run and your knee feels a bit off or your shoulder feels a little
Yeah.
off, then if an athlete comes back and feeds that back to me, then it's kind of I don't sort of dismiss it, but it's a case of, oh well, it could be that you just sort of slept funny, or that you sat on like the bus a bit differently to normal, your legs were a bit crushing. There are all these things that
Yeah.
can cause like some low level pain, which are completely innocent in the grand scheme of things. Now, if somebody
Yep.
comes back and they do another session, a swim, a bike, or a run, and they report the same issue again, I will then say to them, okay, so let's take some time. Let's do some stretches. Let's do some ability work in that area. So if somebody, I know it's a classic example, if somebody, is starting to feel a pull on their Achilles tendon, let's spend 10 minutes each night, if that, maybe just 5 minutes, stretching
Yeah.
out both of the muscles
Mhm.
in your calf and just really
Yeah.
trying to sort of to loosen up and see how that goes. And at that point, most people by then, that will sort of ease off or disappear. If somebody does a third
Yeah.
run and it's still an issue, that's
Yeah.
when I'll say to them, we need to take action. We need
Yeah.
to get an outside opinion because it's clear that this is like it's three in a row. That's no longer a
Yeah.
coincidence. That's no longer just a little knot, something that is trying to work itself out. Especially if it's in an area such as the knee, such as the hip, such as the Achilles tendon, something like that,
Good points.
then we need to get a diagnosis. Now, when for your money, because there are all sorts of people out there who would be able to
Yeah.
assist somebody with an injury. Of course, you could go get
Yeah.
sports massage, you could go to an osteopath, you could go
Yeah.
to a chiropractor, you could
Yeah.
go to a physio. So could you just
Yeah.
explain what in your mind the differences are between those
Yeah.
different practitioners?
it's a very interesting question. It's probably one that's heavily debated between the kind of three professions. I'm going to kind of do it as a bit of a split into
Mm,
three and into one. So
yeah,
physios, osteopaths, and chiropractors theoretically all should be the same. That we all each have slightly different training,
mm,
but there's nuances between, and I'll come on to that in a second. And then I'm going to put sports masseuses into a second
yeah,
separate gap.
yeah,
So that's the kind of first draw I'd differentiate. Sports masseuse is a good bit of way of creating a bit of prevention, feels nice, bit of massage, good for recovery, but won't really have much understanding of actual injury. It is something to help recovery speeds, maintain the quality and mobility of your muscles. It's very simple, and it's something that it can be very, very effective. And you'll see top guys using it a hell of a lot. And like you look at the Tour de France every evening, they've got,
yeah.
well, it's usually their physio, but they're doing sports massage. It's that kind of intra training thing that it can work quite nicely, but there's no real technicality to it. A quite buzzy subject. I'm not going to say if there is any osteopaths or chiropractors watching, it's always quite a debated topic. And as
Mm,
my perspective is the difference between, as I say, there should be no difference between osteos, chiros, and physios. We are all access to the same research. We get to the point where that we all should have the same biases, volumes of training. But you'll notice I said the word should. And as I say, there is both interesting. The nuance usually comes within the profession. So as I say, I know there's chiropractors and osteopaths out there that are excellent chiros and osteos, and they will promote the exact same ideas of strength training, exposure, and development. If we were to utilize stereotypes, just to kind of take the words off my exposure, physios, I would stereotype as we're lucky. We are the only royal chartered profession of the three. So
mm,
we are covered by a royal charter that means anyone governing or working under the word physiotherapist has to has a BSc honours degree in physiotherapy, and if they don't, then our royal clinicians, our Charter Society of Physiotherapists, will essentially sue the bejeebus out of whoever's kind of
yeah,
covered, as it were, sort of thing.
yeah.
So we have a really good,
It's a
strong kind
protected
of
term.
backing. It's a protected term, similar to that
Yeah,
of accountancy. It's that same
yeah.
like term as that royal charter of accountants. Anything royal charter it is a protected term, and we have a much more of a stereotype in the idea of exercise. The idea that say we work much more with exercise and sports teams. You'll say it's very rare that you'll see a professional chiropractor at Arsenal or Chelsea Football Club, for example. It's
Yeah.
always the physio, as it were, sort of thing. It's stereotyped into that little bit of, and don't get me wrong, all those clubs will definitely have osteos and chiropractors, but the stereotype is very much in that environment. Osteopathy is a little bit more stereotyped as a bit more alternative. We'll often go down the idea of a little bit of altered styles of treatment, a bit more
Hmm.
variation in terms of maybe a little bit less research based in some cases. Again, I don't want to say this is all osteopaths. As I say, there are some absolutely cracking osteopaths out there that will but work into it. The trickiness is it's often these individuals are much more guided by, again, their own direction, because again, we're all got access to the same research after once we qualify. And if that individual is a sporting individual in themselves, they're likely going to be quite good. But it's that idea of the stereotype, the average, I would say, would go a bit more down the alternative route, a bit
Hmm.
more kind of things like cranial osteopathy, and you kind of go, there's less scientific backing behind those styles of treatment, I would say. Um, and certainly in the world of what we call nice guidelines, which are National Institute of Clinical Excellence, which is essentially our governing body for
Hmm.
all medical professionals that govern the styles of recommended treatment that
Yeah.
we are allowed and recommended to provide. They often step out of that environment. And then chiropractors, again, you get to the point where probably a little bit more stereotyped into the kind of bones and the clicking and the kind of popping of joints and all that sort of thing, and
Yeah.
mobility, kind of a quick fix. Again, you'll have, I know personally, some absolutely excellent chiropractors that are very pro the idea of movement screening and things and the active strength training exposure, but they often are a little bit more stereotyped to the initial treatment and have a little bit less knowledge in the exercise and conditioning world.
Yeah.
And that is, if we were to govern the three again, brilliant. Each has an element of merit, but the key aspect of physio is that we are very much more in the world of exercise and physiology than the
Yeah.
other two, and that's probably without too much debate. I don't think from the other professions they'd agree, and
Mhm.
everyone has their own areas of specialism, but
Yeah.
certainly for sports injuries, the key element is that we work a lot more with strength and exercise and hands-on work than the other two professions. Principally, would be the difference.
Yes. As a coach, I generally recommend against athletes who are experiencing any kind of pain or injury or something like that to go along to a chiropractor and to sort of get themselves talked into a back cracking.
Yeah, it
Because
is.
it's something that it carries a lot of risk associated with it. I
Yeah,
know several people who
absolutely.
have come away and
Yeah,
they swear by these. But I think that
yeah,
for an athlete, the cause of your
yeah,
injury is unlikely to be due to anything that's going to be corrected, with a
absolutely,
with a or just like one quick adjustment like that. It is probably going
absolutely.
to it's going to involve a rehab process. It's going to involve strength training, and not to be
Yeah,
drawn down that kind of that promise of
yeah,
that quick win
yeah.
because
So
very occasionally they do go wrong.
yeah,
I don't know the
yeah.
numbers, but it
Yeah, yeah, and they can go seriously wrong in some cases out there, but it is. But as you say, it's similar to that, and I'll draw it back to the idea of training. Is that if it seems like a quick fix, usually it's a little bit of a false promise. It's one of
yes,
those ones that you go, I'm just glad you're just going to knock down to a 1 hour 20 half marathon. It'll be easy. We'll just do this training. You go, anything that sounds too good to be
yeah,
true, most of the time probably is. And it is, as you say, this idea, certainly, as I say, clicking, cracking is a placebo. There is that is, it's one of those things that, and people, I'm more than happy to debate people on that topic. And it's really that question of why the odd person will kind of work through. And I don't knock the idea of placebos because they can be very
yeah, yeah,
powerful.
yeah,
But the act of clicking and popping categorically does nothing to change your internal physiology. It does the clicking and cracking is no more than air bubbles moving around a joint. There is no physiological alterations happening at that time, and I'm more than happy to debate that subject with anyone. Again, can it have benefit? There's research studies that shows placebo-based
mm,
alterations and changes because the brain is a very fascinating thing in the best of times. So how it responds to stimuli itself can be very different.
mhm,
But at that moment, again, as you say, lots of people can be lulled into this sense of security of, oh, we'll just need to pop this seven
yeah.
times this week. And then once you've reset that joint back to there, it's going to be permanently. You go, nah, that's just not a thing. It's categorically not something that happens.
Yeah. And I guess the final person that a an athlete could go to if they are
Yeah.
suffering with pain, which is something that I think we're both going to steer people away from doing, is some people's immediate reaction can be, oh, well, I'll book a GP appointment. My knee hurts, I get the GP to look at it.
Sometimes.
But if you
Yeah.
go to a GP practice, and you sit down and again it can take people several weeks to get an appointment sometimes, which is all time that's lost to
Yeah.
training. You sit down with the
Absolutely.
GP and they'll go, when I run my knee hurts, and they go, well, don't run then, next please, because
Here's a medication.
yeah,
Mm.
exactly. The GP is there. They're there to have people walk out of their office, pain free. They've got
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
there. They're about to give somebody their cancer test results. They've got
Yeah.
somebody there who's coming in for, a serious screening, and somebody turns up and goes, "When I run, my knee hurts." It's not really it's definitely not within their skill set to be able to diagnose
Yeah.
that. They might recommend. I mean, there's the possibility they could refer you on to a physio, but I know that most NHS trusts allow you to self-refer yourself to physio,
Yeah.
so you can actually get in
Yeah.
touch with the physiotherapy department at your local hospital
Yeah,
and be able to, and then get yourself on the waiting list that way. And that I
yeah,
would say 99 times out of 100, if you book yourself a GP appointment because you're suffering with some kind of sporting injury or pain,
yeah.
they're just going to signpost you to go somewhere else. It's going to be a very frustrating experience for both of you.
And essentially, and that is say the clues in the name. They are a general practitioner, and
Yeah.
again, the reason why they are front facing is that they are a referral service. If you look at even down right through to the oncological element of things,
Mm.
the GP aren't going to they're going to treat anything oncological. They're going to refer you on to oncology.
Yes.
It's that process of, and oncology for say if I'm saying it's the kind of cancer referral pathway. It's that idea of going. It's again, and that's the same. And again, they're trained immensely well, but no one can have that much knowledge and everything to
No.
create specific knowledge. It's impossible. They are excellent practitioners, but and again, the reason I treat at least, well, probably 6 or 7 of the GPs in the areas myself. GPs come to me
Yep.
in order to have treatment for their sporting injuries because a good practitioner knows their own areas of liability and areas that they don't understand or don't have the time to understand,
Yep.
and will seek help in that environment in the same way that I would for if I had kind of chest infections
Yes.
or something like that. And you sit there and go, it's not a weakness, it's just utilizing the idea of referring and talking to the correct person.
Exactly. It's going to the right person for your condition who's going to be able to help you the best. And if we're training for an event and if we're suffering with some kind of knee pain and we've got an Ironman that's coming up in 6 weeks, then we can't afford to dilly-dally around. We need to find ourselves someone who we can get, see it preferably within the next 48 hours if we really are getting worried and be able to then diagnose from there. That is the end of the first half of the episode. I'm going to stick George's contact details down in the show notes should you wish to get in contact with him. Obviously, if you have, a physio who you can chat to, who comes from that world of triathlon competition themselves, I think there's a huge amount of value in that. Okay. And he's looking at doing virtual appointments as well as in person. So if there's something you just want to talk to him, get some advice on rehab, then he is there to help you as however he can. Those are down in the show notes. But as promised, here is a quick summary of what we discussed in plain English. What causes a large number of injuries, though not all injuries in triathlon, is quite often a lack of strength, a lack of mobility. And this is the kind of thing that we develop in the gym. But a lot of people, they will find excuses, they'll find reasons not to do it. They tell themselves that they don't need to do strength training, they don't need to go to the gym, they just want to swim, cycle and run. And in their mind, stronger quads, stronger legs, bigger lungs is all that is needed to perform. But people who neglect the strength work, they then end up injured, they go to a physiotherapist and they then get told to do the exercises they should have been doing in the gym anyway. If you are injured at some point, if you do pick up a niggle, if you neglect the strength work, or you could go to the best physio in the world, you can go to the best coach in the world and you still run the risk of it getting injured. Once you go out for a run or a ride or a swim and you get the same pain in the same area for 3 sessions in a row, this is probably something we need to get seen. The sooner that you get to a physio to be able to assess you and work out what's going on, fingers crossed, the sooner we'll be able to get you up and running again. Most of these injuries, if you nip them in the bud, it's an awful lot easier than ignoring them and just hoping that it will go away. Now, physiotherapy is one of those things you just need to get the credit card out and worry about it later. If you have been putting in hundreds of hours of training for your race and you pick up this injury and you're unable to train properly, you need to get it seen to. You need to be able to go. And now you can go for a full rehab program where you're seeing a physio multiple times a week. You could go for a simple one-off assessment and they'll be able to give you some exercises to be getting on with to help with that injury. But either way, you can't bury your head in the sand here. You can't and ah about the cost. You need to just find a way to make it happen. If you do end up injured, the reason we recommend that you go to a private physiotherapy practice is you can get an appointment normally within sort of 24, 48 hours in most cases, depending on the physio and how busy they are and the like. And they can then get you started on your rehab journey. You can, should you wish, see an osteopath, see a chiropractor. A bit of sports massage never hurts, but this really is something that the sports massage is just there to release some of the soft tissue. It doesn't necessarily treat the source of the problem. So go to a physio. Ideally a physio who understands sport and endurance athletes, who then be able to set you a plan that is right for you, rather than just a sort of a photocopy of some very basic exercises for people who tend to suffer with that kind of issue in the general population. You're an athlete, and we need to approach your rehab differently to someone who is just recovering from surgery or a fall or something similar like that. So that's really it for the first episode. There is a lot of laying the foundations, explaining sort of the basics, and in next week's episode we get into the weeds a bit more. We start to talk about the rehab journey itself, how that rehab should look. We start to talk about the sort of the makeup of a tendon and how it is that it gets placed under strain, how it is that we can sort of include sort of various interventions in our training, again to reduce the chance of injury. We start looking at things such as sort of the effect that sleep has on injury prevention, which is really interesting. And we generally start looking at some more sort of practical, actionable tips in next week's episode. So if you're not subscribed already, make sure that you are subscribed so you get a notification when that episode goes live. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for listening. I hope you'll join us next week for episode 2. All right, take care.